Your Honor, I never touched that safe. I never entered that private room. I respected the family's privacy completely.
You know, after sitting on this bench for more decades than I sometimes care to count, you start to believe you've seen every shade of human deception. You see people lie about money, about property, about the damage they've done to a borrowed car. You get used to the ordinary lies, but the lies that still get under my skin, the ones that still make my blood run a little colder, are the lies told by the people we invite into our own homes, the people we trust with our most precious treasures. I remember the morning this case landed on my docket. The courtroom was unusually quiet, the kind of heavy quiet that usually precedes a storm. I had my morning coffee black, no sugar, exactly the same way I've had it since my first day on the job. My clerk, Sarah, handed me the file, and I could tell by the way she didn't say a single word that this wasn't going to be just another routine dispute. The file read, Henderson versus Miller. The issue? A stolen heirloom necklace, vanished without a trace from a locked master bedroom safe. Let's be honest for a second. When you let someone into your home to care for your children, you aren't just giving them a physical key to your front door. You are giving them a key to your peace of mind. You are handing them your entire world and silently pleading, please, keep this safe. But what happens when the person hired to protect your sanctuary is the very one tearing it apart from the inside? Before I go any further into what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever had that gut feeling, that quiet, nagging instinct telling you someone simply wasn't who they pretended to be, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Because today's story is exactly about trusting that instinct. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of how this unraveled. I called the case. The plaintiff, Mrs. Henderson, walked up to the podium. She was a working mother. You didn't need to ask her occupation to see the map of exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes. It was that deep, bone-weary fatigue that only comes from trying to hold a family together while balancing a demanding career. She looked fragile, like a woman who had not only lost a piece of jewelry, but had lost her faith in people. And standing on the other side was the defendant, the nanny, Miss Miller. She walked up to her podium with her chin held high, wearing a crisp, modest blouse, looking like the absolute picture of innocence. She had that practiced, polished look of someone who was very used to being believed. But I've been reading faces for 40 years, and while her clothes screamed professional, her hands gripping the edge of that wooden podium just a fraction too tightly, her knuckles turning white, told a completely different story. The air in my courtroom felt thick. Miss Miller looked me dead in the eye and said the words that would eventually become her own trap. Your Honor, I never touched that safe. Little did she know, the truth wasn't just going to come out in testimony. It was going to be played on a screen for the whole courtroom to see. I looked back down at the file, then back up at Miss Miller. I asked her to explain exactly what happened on the afternoon of October 14th. Now, pay attention to this, because the way a person builds a lie tells you everything you need to know about their character. Miss Miller didn't hesitate. She had a story ready, perfectly ironed out, just like her blouse. She claimed she had been in the living room with the toddler the entire time. She said the master bedroom door was closed, and she would never cross that boundary because she deeply respected the family's privacy. Listen to that phrase, deeply respected the family's privacy. It's a classic psychological deflection. When someone over-explains their own morality before you even accuse them of lacking it, they are usually trying to hide the exact opposite. I watched her eyes. When a person is recalling a genuine memory, their eyes usually move up and to the left or right, accessing the visual centers of the brain. Miss Miller's eyes didn't move at all. They stared straight ahead, dead, practiced, and cold. She wasn't remembering a Tuesday afternoon. She was reciting a rehearsed script. I then turned my attention back to Mrs. Henderson, the mother. I asked her why she suspected the nanny, and this is where the real pain of the situation spilled out. She didn't yell. She didn't point fingers in a dramatic rage. Instead, her voice cracked. She told me that the stolen necklace wasn't just an expensive piece of jewelry. It was a fragile, antique family heirloom, the last physical connection she had to her late grandmother. It was meant to be passed down to her own daughter. You see, this is the exact pain point that people who steal never consider. They look at an object and see a dollar amount. But the victim sees a memory. They see a legacy. They see a piece of their heart ripped right out of their sanctuary. Mrs. Henderson explained that she had gone to the safe to retrieve a document, only to find the safe locked, undisturbed, but the velvet box inside completely empty. No forced entry, no broken windows, just a silent, devastating betrayal by someone who had the alarm code, the keys, and her absolute trust. I looked at Mrs. Henderson's hands. They were trembling, just slightly, as she held onto the podium. It wasn't just the loss of the necklace. It was the chilling realization that the person feeding her child, the person playing with her baby on the living room rug, was living a double life. The fear wasn't about the money anymore. The real fear, the one that keeps a mother awake at night, was, who is really in my house? In my courtroom, I have a simple rule. If it doesn't make sense, it isn't true. And Miss Miller's story was starting to fray at the edges. But liars always make one fundamental mistake. They assume they are the smartest person in the room. Miss Miller stood there, radiating arrogance, wrapped in a cheap imitation of innocence. She thought it would be her word against a stressed, exhausted mother's word. But Mrs. Henderson, driven by that primal, protective instinct every mother has, had done something Miss Miller completely failed to anticipate, and that piece of evidence was sitting right on my desk. Now I want you to picture the atmosphere in a courtroom when a secret is about to be dragged into the light. It's not just silence. It's a heavy, vibrating tension. I looked at my bailiff and gave him a sharp, clear nod. I said, "Officer, please activate the monitor. Mrs. Henderson has submitted a piece of evidence that the defendant clearly didn't expect to exist." I watched Miss Miller's face the moment I said the word evidence. For a split second faster than a heartbeat, I saw her mask of innocence fracture. You know that look? It's the look a predator gives when it realizes the cage door has been locked from the outside. But then, her arrogance took over again. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and let out a tiny, dismissive huff. She was still banking on her own intellectual superiority. She was thinking, I was careful, I wore gloves, I wiped the safe. There is no proof. But here is the lesson that people like Miss Miller never learn. Arrogance is a blindfold. It makes you so focused on your own brilliance that you forget the world is watching in ways you can't see. The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, taken from a wide-angle lens hidden inside a nondescript bookshelf in the corner of the master bedroom. It was a nanny cam, one of those small, silent observers that parents install not because they want to be suspicious, but because their gut instinct has already sounded the alarm. They install it because they love their children and their home more than they trust a stranger's smile. As the video began to play, the courtroom went deathly still. On the screen, the master bedroom was empty and quiet. Then, the door creaked open. You see Miss Miller walk in, but she wasn't carrying a laundry basket. She wasn't looking for a stray toy or checking the thermostat. She was walking with a specific, predatory purpose. Her shoulders were hunched, her head was darting left to right like a fox in a henhouse. It was the posture of someone who knew exactly where the treasure was buried and exactly how much time she had to dig it up. I hit the pause button right as she reached the safe. I looked over the top of my glasses, straight into Miss Miller's eyes. The shade of her skin had changed from a healthy glow to a sickly ashen gray, the kind of color I usually only see in people who realize their life is about to change forever. I said to her, "Miss Miller, less than 10 minutes ago, you looked me in the eye and told me under penalty of perjury that you never entered this room on that afternoon. You told me you deeply respected the family's privacy. Can you explain to me, using plain English, why the woman on this screen who looks exactly like you, wearing the same blouse you have on in your social media photos, is standing 3 feet away from a safe she was never supposed to know existed?" The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of a misunderstanding. It was the silence of a character being stripped bare in front of the world. In my courtroom, once the light of truth hits you, there is no corner dark enough to hide in. I want you to look closely at the screen. Forget what Miss Miller said in her deposition. Look at what she is doing. In the video, she doesn't just walk into the room, she stalks it. She heads straight for the master closet. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't look around in confusion. She moves a hanging shoe rack to the side, revealing a small, keypad-operated wall safe. Now, here is the part that made my skin crawl, and it should make yours crawl too. She didn't struggle with the code. She didn't try random numbers. She punched in a 6-digit sequence with the muscle memory of someone who had practiced it 100 times. She had been watching. Every time Mrs. Henderson opened that safe to put away her jewelry after a gala or a work event, Miss Miller was somewhere in the shadows, or perhaps peering through a cracked door, recording that sequence in her mind. I stopped the footage right as the safe door clicked open. I looked at the defendant. "Miss Miller," I said, my voice as cold as the evidence on that screen, "you told this court that you didn't even know where the safe was located. You swore that you never stepped foot in this closet. And yet, here you are, on high-definition video, entering a private security code, like you're withdrawing cash from your own ATM. Are you going to tell me this is a deep fake? Are you going to tell me that's your long-lost twin sister?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The arrogance I saw earlier? It was gone, replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. She looked at her lawyer, but even he had turned his head away. There is no legal defense for the truth when it's staring you in the face. But here is the most heartbreaking part of this entire sequence, the part that truly defines the word evil. If you look at the timestamp in the bottom corner of the video, you'll see it was 2:14 p.m. Do you know where the Hendersons' 2-year-old son was at 2:14 p.m.? He was supposed to be in his high chair in the kitchen finishing his lunch. This woman left a toddler unattended, near a flight of stairs and a kitchen full of hazards, just so she could slip away for 5 minutes to rob the people who were paying her salary. She didn't just steal a necklace. She abandoned her duty. She put a child's life at risk for a piece of gold. That is the moment the case shifted from a simple, small claims dispute about property to a moral catastrophe. I looked at Mrs. Henderson. She was sobbing quietly now, her face buried in her hands. It wasn't about the gold anymore. It was the realization that the woman she trusted to protect her child was willing to leave that child in danger just to satisfy her own greed. I turned back to the defendant. "Miss Miller, we aren't just talking about a necklace anymore. We are talking about the fact that you are a predator who wore a smile to get through the front door. And I'm just getting started." I let the video stay paused on that one frame, the frame where her hand is reaching into the safe. I wanted that image to burn into the back of her retinas. I wanted her to see what the rest of the world now saw. Not a caregiver, not a professional, but a common thief. Now, I want you to pay attention to the psychology of what happened next. When a liar is backed into a corner by undeniable, high-definition evidence, they usually go through 3 stages. First is the stunned silence. Second is the technical excuse. And third is the full collapse. Miss Miller was currently vibrating between stages 1 and 2. She finally found her voice, but it wasn't the confident, polished voice from 10 minutes ago. It was thin. It was reedy. She said, "Your Honor, I noticed the safe door was slightly ajar. I was only trying to make sure it was secure. I was protecting the family's assets." I leaned forward. I didn't yell. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing a judge can do is lower their voice to a whisper that cuts like a razor. I said, "Miss Miller, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. We just watched you with your own fingers input a complex 6-digit code. You didn't find it ajar. You unlocked it with the precision of a safecracker. And if you were protecting it, why did you walk out of that closet with your fist clenched tight and shove something into your pocket?" I looked at the audience. Have you ever seen someone try to physically shrink themselves? That's what she was doing. She was pulling her shoulders in, tucking her chin, trying to occupy as little space as possible. It's a primal human instinct. When we are exposed and ashamed, we want to disappear. But in my courtroom, there is nowhere to hide. I turned back to the mother, Mrs. Henderson. I asked her, "When did you realize it was gone?" She told me she had gone to the safe that evening to get the necklace for a memorial dinner for her grandmother. She described the feeling of her heart dropping into her stomach when she saw the empty box. She told me she looked at Miss Miller, who was currently rocking the baby to sleep, and asked her if she'd seen anything. And do you know what this defendant did? She looked that mother in the eye, while holding her child, and said, "Oh my God, that's terrible. Do you think the cleaning crew did it?" That is the deadly point of this case. It's the level of calculated sociopathy required to blame someone else, someone whose livelihood depends on their reputation, just to cover your own tracks. She was willing to let an innocent cleaning crew lose their jobs, maybe even go to jail, so she could keep a piece of gold she didn't earn. I looked back at the defendant. Her breathing was shallow now. I could see the pulse thumping in her neck, what we call the carotid shiver. It's a sign of extreme autonomic arousal. Her body was screaming guilty, even if her lips wouldn't say it yet. I stood up. I didn't usually stand up, but I needed to look down at her from the full height of the bench. "Miss Miller," I said, "the necklace isn't in your pocket anymore. It's been 3 weeks. I want to know exactly where it is." Because if you tell me now, maybe, just maybe, the police outside that door will show you a shred of the mercy you didn't show this family. Where is the necklace? I watched the defendant's face carefully as I waited for her answer. In my line of work, we call this the point of no return. It's that agonizing stretch of time where a criminal realizes that the bridge behind them has been burned and the ground beneath them is giving way. Miss Miller's eyes darted toward the exit, then back to the floor. She wasn't looking for the truth. She was looking for a trap door. Now, I want you to understand the psychology of a cornered predator. When their social mask is ripped away, they don't always fall to their knees and confess. Instead, they often do something much more revealing. They try to bargain with a reality that no longer exists. Miss Miller took a shaky breath. Her bottom lip was trembling, a classic sign of emotional leakage. No matter how much she tried to stay composed, her body was betraying her. She whispered, I didn't sell it. I just borrowed it. I was going to bring it back. My mother, she's sick. I needed the money for her treatments. I hit the gavel once. Hard. The sound echoed like a gunshot in that quiet room. Don't you dare, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. Don't you dare sit there and use your mother or anyone else as a human shield for your own greed. You didn't borrow a locked heirloom from a hidden safe. You didn't borrow the peace of mind of this family. You stole. You calculated. You waited for the moment this mother turned her back, and you struck. I want those of you watching at home to think about this for a second. This is the ultimate deadly point of betrayal. It's not just the theft. It's the false moral justification. People like Miss Miller tell themselves a lie so they can sleep at night. They tell themselves they are the victim of circumstances, which somehow gives them the right to victimize others. It's a sickness of character. I looked back at Mrs. Henderson. The poor woman looked like she had been struck. To hear her nanny, the woman she had shared meals with, the woman who knew her children's favorite bedtime stories, use a sick mother excuse to justify stealing a dead grandmother's legacy, it was too much. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. I turned my gaze back to the defendant. Her sick mother story was likely another layer of the same rotten onion. I've seen it 1,000 times. When the I didn't do it lie fails, they pivot to the I had to do it lie. Miss Miller, I said, leaning over the bench until I was just inches away from the monitor, lying to me once is a mistake. Lying to me twice is a choice. But continuing to lie after I've shown you the video evidence of your crime? That is an insult to this court and to every honest person who works for a living. I am going to ask you one last time, and I want you to remember that there is a court reporter taking down every syllable. Where is the necklace? Did you hawk it? Did you give it to a boyfriend? Because the police are already at your apartment, and if they find it before you tell me, your chance for any leniency is gone. The defendant's face went from ashen to a ghostly, translucent white. She realized I wasn't playing a game. This wasn't a TV show for her anymore. It was the beginning of a prison sentence. Her hands began to shake so violently, she had to grip the podium just to stay upright. The map of deceit was finally being redrawn into a map of consequences. I've spent enough time in the legal system to know that the wheels of justice can sometimes grind slowly, but when they finally catch up to you, they do so with a weight that can crush the breath right out of your lungs. As I sat there, looking at Miss Miller, whose hands were now trembling so violently she had to hide them behind the podium, my bailiff Bird stepped forward and handed me a small, yellow piece of paper that had just been faxed over from the local precinct. Now, I want you to lean in and listen to this, because this is the moment where greed meets reality. The police didn't just search her apartment, they searched her recent history, and what they found on that yellow slip of paper was the final nail in the coffin of her sick mother lie. It wasn't a medical bill. It wasn't a pharmacy receipt. It was a pawn shop ticket from a place across town, a place known for asking very few questions and paying very little cash. I held that paper up, looking at it over the rim of my glasses. Miss Miller, I said, my voice dropping to that low, surgical tone I use when I'm about to cut through a mountain of nonsense. This ticket shows that on the very same day you claim you were borrowing this necklace to help your mother, you walked into a pawn shop and sold it for $800. $800. I turned to Mrs. Henderson, the plaintiff. Madam, what was the appraised value of that heirloom? Mrs. Henderson stood up, her voice barely a whisper, thick with a mix of grief and absolute disgust. $50,000, Your Honor. But the money doesn't matter. It was the only thing I had left of my grandmother. Do you feel that? That's the deadly point of disrespect. This is what happens when a predator looks at your soul, your history, and your love, and assigns it a price tag of $800. She didn't just steal gold. She liquidated a family's legacy for the price of a cheap television or a weekend getaway. She devalued a woman's entire heritage because she was too lazy to earn her own way. I looked back at the defendant. Her face had moved past ashen and into a state of total, hollow defeat. The map of deceit was gone, replaced by the mask of the found out. There is a specific look people get when they realize their get-out-of-jail-free card has just been shredded in front of a live audience. Her eyes were glazed, staring at that pawn ticket like it was a ghost. "You sold it," I said, hitting the bench with my hand for emphasis. "You didn't borrow it. You didn't save it. You took a piece of this woman's heart and traded it for pocket change, and you did it while her child was in the other room, trusting you to keep his world safe." I could see the audience in my courtroom shifting in their seats. There was a collective sense of outrage, a shared realization that we weren't just looking at a thief, we were looking at a void where a conscience should be. But I wasn't finished, because the pawn shop ticket gave us something more than just proof of the crime. It gave us a location. And in my courtroom, I don't just want to punish the guilty, I want to make the victim whole. I looked at Bird and said, "Contact that shop. Tell them that property is stolen. It is part of an active criminal investigation, and if that necklace isn't in a police locker within the hour, I'll have the owner standing where she is." Then I turned my gaze back to Miss Miller. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Now, we're going to talk about where you're going next, and I promise you, they don't have a safe there for you to pick. I've always said that you can't teach character. You can teach a person how to drive a car, how to file a report, or how to fold a fitted sheet, but you cannot teach them to have a soul." As I looked at Miss Miller in those final moments, I didn't see a woman anymore. I saw a hollow shell where a conscience was supposed to be. Now, I want you to look at her one last time. Notice the way her eyes are darting toward the floor, refusing to meet the gaze of the woman whose life she upended. This is what we call moral bankruptcy. When the lies are gone and the excuses have been incinerated by the truth, there is nothing left but the cold, hard reality of who you really are. I turned my attention to the plaintiff, Mrs. Henderson. "Madam," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "the law allows me to award you the maximum of $5,000 for the loss of your property and the breach of contract. But we both know that $5,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to the value of your grandmother's legacy. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the peace of mind you lost the moment this woman walked through your front door." Mrs. Henderson nodded, her eyes red, but her spirit finally standing tall. She had her answer. She had her justice. Then I turned back to the defendant. The room felt like it was closing in on her. "Miss Miller," I barked, and she jumped, a physical manifestation of a guilty conscience hitting a brick wall. "In this room, I am the judge, but outside those doors, the state of California is waiting for you. The police have the pawn ticket, they have the video, and because the value of that necklace exceeds $50,000, you are looking at a grand theft felony. You didn't just lose a job today, you lost your freedom." I watched her face crumble into a messy, ugly cry. But it wasn't a cry of repentance. It was the cry of a predator who was sad she got caught. If you take anything away from today's case, let it be this: trust is a gift, not a right. When you give someone the keys to your home, you are giving them your vulnerability. Never ignore your gut. If something feels off, it's because it is off. Mrs. Henderson's intuition saved her from losing even more. I want to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing? Have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you from a disaster? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read them, and I want to know how you protect your sanctuary. And if you believe that justice was served today, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I stood up, adjusted my robe, and looked at my bailiff. "Bird," I said, "escort the defendant to the officers waiting in the hallway. I'm done with her." I hit the gavel one final time. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. We are adjourned. As I walked off that bench, I didn't look back, because in my courtroom, once the truth is spoken, the story is over. And for Miss Miller, the real nightmare was just beginning.